Okay, this is Mike Benoit, and this is going to be a critique on parts of Stefan Molyneux's Don't Tread on Me, 26 Libertarian Questions Answered. It was something broadcast over Liberty Me, and so what we're going to do is, well, actually, I was supposed to start this off with showing Mr. Molyneux, so I did not do what I wanted there, but instead of losing that, we're just going to, well, I want to get that picture in there. I guess we don't need to. We'll just see how many people watch this anyways. And what we're going to do is play some of this and then critique it as it goes along. I'm kind of hoping to expose the cult of Stefan Molyneux a little bit. If you're a cult member, you probably don't want to continue because there's to be some reality you don't want to hear. So let's start off and hear what he has to say.
Liberty is where we need to all start. I mean, philosophy is where everyone should start. Science started with philosophy, medicine started with philosophy, geometry, biology, physics, the whole umbrella of the most successful areas of human thought all started with philosophy.
Okay, so that's not true. It's absolutely not true. He's saying that all of these areas of human knowledge started with philosophy. And the opposite is true. So, and he talks about these definitions being real important as we come on just a little bit further down the line. And so people listen to this stuff and they'll say, and they're just taking that in, believing this to be true, not examining it, and it's the opposite of truth. If you look at philosophy here, it says it's the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge. So these other things, science, whatever, that's knowledge. And philosophy is the study of that. So what comes first? Philosophy first, or these realities, these existence. They come first, and philosophy is in the studying of those things. Next point.
Like, we know the scientific method from sort of Francis Bacon onwards, but there was literally thousands of years of working out how philosophy can contribute to science beforehand. We know now about the double-blind experiment in medicine, we know about evolution and so on, but all of those had groundings in philosophical definitions and philosophical thought. So one of the things that I really want to get across is the degree to which definitions really matter. So in society, when there's massive amounts of human conflict.
Okay, now this is definitely important. Definitions do matter, and we can find out what he's going to define things here as, and then take a look at them and not just soak it in and agree with his definitions, if you will. Take a look at them and see how accurate they are.
As there is in the realm of politics, as there is in the realm of religion, it all has to do with definitions. So the philosophy of liberty, I would say, first and foremost, what it needs to do, or what we need to do as a movement, is to define what liberty is. Now, that can't just be a personal definition. It has to be philosophical. And by philosophical, I mean it has to be rational, it has to be empirical. Most importantly, though, I'm sure this is some sort of Masonic sign that I'm not aware of, that people then accuse me of being some sort of nose-picking Illuminati. But the most important thing, rational, empirical, but most importantly, it is universal, 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 universal. So I've got this free book on ethics called Universally Preferable Behavior, a Rational Proof of Secular Ethics. I won't go into the arguments in detail here, but the most important question is, what is liberty? Now, I would argue there's really two ways that people define liberty. Liberty of opportunity and liberty to avoid the consequences of bad decisions. So liberty of opportunity is what we all understand as the non-aggression principle.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in there. He just stated that basically liberty, people define liberty two ways. and one of them is to be, you know, have an open playing field, and most people take it that way. And then he goes on to speak to it, maybe not right here so much, but later on he'll go on to speak to people having freedom from their consequences of their actions has been one of the ways that liberty is defined. And here he talks about liberty basically as having an open playing field, and that liberty is the non-aggression principle in action. Now, see, and then he talked about it had to be universal, universal, universal. So all the folks are going to have to agree with that. Now, I don't agree with that, and you look at the non-aggression principle. Basically, he's stating that the non-aggression principle is the definition of liberty, and it's not. The non-aggression principle would be a principle that would stand behind and secure, if it was operated on, it would secure the individual's freedom, and it would secure his liberty. If no one operated with aggression against anyone else, then it would be that principle would work towards securing your freedom or your liberty. And it is not freedom or liberty in itself. You have to listen to this really close, because he's acting like and defining them as being synonymous. Now, if we look and say what's a universal definition of liberty, it would probably, and you find this right in the non-aggression principle, if you will, it would be the individual's free will and his right to self-determinism, self-ownership. Now, the non-aggression principle sort of is a pillar that works in that direction to uphold that ideal, as a tool to secure that free will or that self-determinism. And if you want a universal definition for people to grab onto, there are people who are not going to grab on to the non-aggression principle as a universal definition of liberty, because it's not. It doesn't define liberty. What it does is defines what non-aggression is. And non-aggression would work towards, if you will, nourishing our right to liberty, or standing at the doorway of the intellectual philosopher's understanding towards the Hall of Liberty and guarding the Hall of Liberty. But it is not that what it's designed to secure. And so you cannot define that as liberty. And then he'll go on to talk about, people going, and a lot of stuff, it's like these are false premises that he puts out there, because the non-aggression principle is not the definition of liberty. And it is plain and simple. The definition of liberty or freedom that we're endowed with is our free will. Even when someone limits our free will decisions to two choices, die in war or die at the firing squad for refusing to fight in war, there's still there's some free will that operates there. And so the free will can never be destroyed. It can be, if you will, arrested or restricted. And so that is an inalienable right. The non-aggression principle would work to maximizing that right. We do have free will, and it's limited, though, to the physical universe and the rules of the physical universe. And what we're talking about when we don't want government to restrict our free will or our self-determinism, when they write laws that have nothing to do with one of us violating the rights or free will of someone else's self-determinism. So let's get back to this and play a little bit more.
So you simply say you can't initiate force against other human beings. That means that the playing ground of whoever wants to go and do whatever they want to do in society is open and available. Now, nobody's going to say that the playing ground in human society is perfectly even, perfectly equal. There are people who are born rich, there are people who are born beautiful, there are people who are born poor, there are people who are born ugly, there are people who are born with funny nasally voices, there are people who are born with cleft palates and unibrows and different colored eyeballs. So it's not like there's genetics, tall, short, and all that, propensity towards leanness, propensity towards being overweight. These are all things that are just biological variations, and you can't equal those. I mean, you simply can't make those equal. You can't take a couple of inches of shin bone.
Okay, what he just said is, of course, all true and correct, but it has nothing to do with the premise of the argument and the definition. He's going into talking about what isn't freedom of equal opportunity. But again, it's not that doesn't really define a universal definition of freedom, and that's free will and self-determinism. And it's not more complicated than that.
From tall people and insert it into the shin bone of short people, I guess you could, but it would be pretty horrifying. Saw 9, the great height equalizer, comes to town with a giant set of blades and Procruste's bed. So biological variations we can't really do anything about, but equality of opportunity, which means no force will bar one human being from pursuing his or her goals. That is what most of us mean by liberty, by freedom. It means.
Okay, and then see, that's the thing there. You've got free will and self-determinism. That's liberty. Now, if somebody uses force or other mechanisms to inhibit your right of free will or self-determinism, then of course that would be an aggression, a transgression. But that is something that one cannot guarantee. The idea is a nice idea that nobody will violate someone's right to self-determinism, but the bottom line, at the end of the day, people will. And so, and then the next question would be, how do we deal with that when they do? To ask for the universal acceptance that people will not violate one another is a nice idea, but it still doesn't define liberty. It defines what that thing is that prevents liberty, or that helps secure liberty from being violated.
Don't stand in my way in my pursuit of my happiness, right? The pursuit of happiness is the important phrase and a fairly mediocre Canadian band. And it means that you can pursue your happiness and you can be guaranteed the liberty to pursue your happiness. And that means maybe you'll achieve it and maybe you won't. Maybe you'll fail. But I think that is really important to focus on. They didn't, obviously the founding fathers wisely did not say that you were going to be guaranteed happiness, but you would be guaranteed the opportunity to pursue happiness however you saw fit. Now that's what people who haven't made big mistakes in their life are interested in promoting as liberty, and I think that sort of makes sense.
Okay, and then he says that's what people who haven't made big mistakes in their life are interested in doing to promote liberty. So, what's a corollary to that? If you don't agree with that, then obviously you made big mistakes in your life. Now, to agree to the non-aggression principle is what civilized folks find in their self-interest to do. And of course, we agree that that's a rational thing to do. Now, we also know that people will act irrationally, and they will actually do things that violate that principle and violate other people's life and liberty. You know what? And they don't have to have made big mistakes in their life, or no mistakes for that matter.
On the other hand, On the other hand, what we have is the liberty that then people start talking about when they have made big mistakes, right? I mean, pre-mistakes and post-mistakes, pre-disaster and post-disaster is really important. It's kind of the tipping point for philosophy as a whole. So, it's like the Titanic before you hit the iceberg is a grand ocean liner full of love and hormones and sex in cars and King of the World screaming Leonardo DiCaprio's. Afterwards, it's, hair like popsicles, hearts freezing, and I guess ice sharks biting people.
Okay, so now he's going to go into, and maybe, the cult of Molyneux likes all these long-winded things, and it's entertaining. It's like watching a movie for you. But he goes into a long-winded dissertation about these people who want freedom from their consequences. And so liberty and freedom doesn't mean you're free from something. Again, if you're going to define liberty. Now, we want to define liberty if he wants to define liberty that we're free from aggression and transgression, that's not the definition of liberty. That would be that which would allow liberty to continue without being arrested or abated if it wasn't transgressed on. Liberty is just what it is. It's self-determinism. It's free will. And of course, that free will and self-determinism is always limited by the environment. We might want to fly, but we don't have the equipment to fly. So we might want to exercise free will to fly off the cliff. And you can't expect, there are barriers in nature and there are barriers with other people. And when one wants to take his free will, his liberty, and violate someone else's, then there's consequences to face, and you're not free from those consequences. So he talks about that for quite a bit in here, those people that think that that's freedom that, to be free from sickness and free from poverty and free from ignorance or whatever. I don't even know if he gets into that. But I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here and see if there's something else I want to cover. And then after that, go to another point in here. I could spend 2 days covering every point, but this should be enough. Let's just skip ahead a little bit and see if he's still on that track 2 or 3 minutes later.
If you've made bad decisions, right? So we'll just take the example of somebody who...
Okay, I'm going to move forward.
Marriage companies, and same thing with people who make what the young people may look up as wristwatches, which was what you used before you had a clock you could swipe on your phone. So it's entirely natural that people want to minimize the consequences of their bad decisions, but societies do really badly when those negative decisions, when the consequences of negative decisions are withheld from people. In other words, when you subsidize people's bad habits.
Okay, I'm going to skip way forward to 2 minutes and
this is
2 hours and 9 minutes
really
into this.
Fundamentally sort of.
Philip Dursey asks, how would you encourage a loved one or close friend to pursue therapy to process trauma, and what type of therapy do you recommend?
Well, the first thing is when it comes to therapy, I think it's important to lead by example. I mean, I have convinced thousands and thousands of people to go into therapy through my conversations with people, both privately and through Free Domain Radio. And I think one of the things that is helpful to people is to see the after picture, right? I mean, if you want to lose weight, if you believe in that, then you can look at the after picture. That can be a motivation. So I'm certainly not a perfect human being, but I came from a very violent and traumatic upbringing, and I have been able to do what I'm able to do. And I put that a lot of that credit goes to my work for years in therapy. So I think when people say, well, Steph has a pretty good life, and he's got a happy marriage, and he's a good dad, and he's got this important show, I want me some of that. So you kind of have to be the fitness trainer who's not 300 pounds, right? I mean, you kind of have to be the guy who's selling face cream that isn't covered in zits or whatever, right? So if the first thing to do is to inspire people, And a lot of people want to jump over that and just try and convince people without inspiring them. So the first thing you need to do, you know, like in the airplane, you use cabin pressure, you put the mask on yourself, and then you help other people. So if you want to convince other people to go to therapy, go to therapy.
You know what? I don't believe that he just talked for almost 2 minutes to say that. You got a loved one who is having an issue with trauma. That's the question. And it says, how would you encourage a loved one to pursue therapy to process trauma? And he goes on for a couple of minutes into this, that, and how he's convinced thousands of people to go and get therapy. And the first thing you got to do is, well, then, you know, you got to lead by example. So you go get therapy. You can't be a fat person and tell someone to go to the gym or whatnot. So first thing you got to do is go get therapy yourself and lead by example. Are you kidding me? Are you absolutely kidding me? This is a person who's trying to process trauma. They're trying to process trauma, and the question is, how do you encourage them, this loved one, to produce therapy, okay? To pursue therapy. So here's this guy that's not trying to process any trauma, and it's okay, but he's got a loved one, like might be a father like me, and my daughter has got this trauma about something, and lost her dog or whatnot, and she can't get over it, and it's our best friend. And so the question is, how do you encourage a loved one to pursue therapy and to process trauma? And the answer is, well, I need to go, to go get therapy, and then say, hey, look at me, I got therapy, I'm better now. I can't believe I can't believe that people are listening to this and like laughing that up. If you don't need therapy, right? It's like if you don't need to eat, you've been eating, but somebody hasn't ate, maybe because they're upset about something. Well, the question is, how can you, help encourage them to eat? It's just unbelievable, the answer he just made there. And in so many of his videos, he's close and he goes all off, wandering all over the place, and that kind of comment is just beyond me. That leads to nowhere, dead end street, whatnot. But someone asked me that question, I would say, in fact, I'm pretty good at being able to talk to them and help them process the trauma. But they weren't willing to talk to me because, maybe they didn't feel comfortable. First, I got some friends that are, I'd say, hey, would you talk to so-and-so, maybe a mutual friend or whatever. And a good listener will just listen and help them unload and unwind. And if they still are a little bit heavy with it, if somebody that's in the business of helping people with trauma and stress and whatnot, if you don't, you maybe go help them find somebody, or offer to help them find somebody. Offer to go with them and be with them to get somebody to help process the trauma. But, you got trauma, okay, well, I'm going to lead by example. I'm going to talk to a psychiatrist, and then you come back and, oh, I'm great, you ought to go. It's like fake you're sick if you're not, and that's really, it's kind of a tyranny upon the mind of man. So that's enough on this one. I'll be doing more, but I love to see those thumbs down comments on these, because it tells me the cult of Molyneux is upset, and the guy is, quite frankly, a quack, a charlatan, and he really doesn't have a clue, but he can just spew, and you people just take his false premises and run with them and think it's gospel. So let's get rid of the charlatans, the quacks. Let's bust tyranny upon the mind of man, because he's just building more tyranny over the mind of man. And yeah, don't come debate me. I'm ready. Okay, so now I got to get to the right camera functions here, and let's see if I can get to that. Close this off. Here we go. Thank you.